Hello, welcome to Newscentre. With me, Parikshit Luthra. In a rare address, Vladimir Putin announced a partial military mobilization, putting more boots on ground in Ukraine amid reports of Russian troops losing major territory. This would translate into 3 lakh people out of Russia's vast reserve of 25 million being called up to fight Putin's war in Ukraine. That's not all. Putin also threatened nuclear retaliation against the West and warned that he was not bluffing. Putin's announcement is also raising fear of a broader conscription, leading to protests against mobilization. As per an independent protest monitoring group, over 1,400 protesters were detained across Russian cities. The Russia-Ukraine war was in the spotlight at the United Nations General Assembly meeting, while US President Joe Biden slammed Russia's nuclear threat as a reckless disregard. Ukrainian President Zelensky said, and I quote, "For us, this is the war for life."
I want to remind you that our country also has various means of destruction, and for separate components, and more modern than those of NATO countries. And when the territorial integrity of our country is threatened, to protect Russia and our people, we will certainly use all the means at our disposal. This is not a bluff.
Mr. Vladimir Zelensky, for trying to steal our territory.
You cannot seize a nation's territory by force. Russia's calling up more soldiers to join the fight, and the Kremlin is organizing a sham referenda to try to annex parts of Ukraine, an extremely significant violation of the UN Charter. This world should see these outrageous acts for what they are.
We cannot agree to a delayed war because it will be even hotter than the war now. For us, this is a war for life.
All right, let's go across to Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, former diplomat, and also Fred Weir, a special correspondent at the Christian Science Monitor, joining us from Moscow. Ambassador Prakash, how do you see this latest address by President Putin ordering partial mobilization, calling up almost 300,000 reservists?
Parikshit, greetings. This is a very dangerous and critical stage that the conflict has gotten into. Calling up the reservists is an ominous development, something that one was hoping not to see. If one looks at it, it's the tacit admission by Putin that they have faced a huge setback at the battlefield. And you are absolutely right, it is not Russia's war, it has become Putin's war. 7 months, very little has gone right for Russia. And it is not just a huge setback for military setback, but a huge blow to the standing of Russia. Russia is a depleted power. And also what is noteworthy is that a former superpower has gotten humbled in its own backyard. So something has gone seriously wrong, whether it is a miscalculation, whether it is a faulty intelligence, whether it's good leadership. But the problem is that Putin believes that he's like a czar, and he's now a wounded tiger, an angry tiger. And how will we act in future if he's going down? I will take his threats seriously because he is capable of causing damage. He may not go down alone, but this is the time where cooler head should prevail, because what is happening is everybody is talking peace but waging war. Everybody's side is saying that they want to discuss it on the negotiating table, but trading insults and name calling. This is actually the time to sit back and sit down on the negotiating table and hammer out a solution, because otherwise we are heading towards a major, major crisis, likes of which the world has rarely seen earlier.
Right, so you're saying that Putin calling up reservists is an ominous sign, and we need to sit across the table and come up with a solution. Fred, if I can come to you, what is your sense after hearing President Putin's speech. Is the Russian president, going to escalate the offensive even further?
Definitely. I think the point of this is, first of all, to stabilize the lines that they have, and to not allow Ukrainian counteroffensives, such as the one in Kharkov a couple of weeks ago, to succeed. And the Russian calculation, I think they're going past the point of no return with these referendums and so on. They're going to declare that front line now is the state border of Russia. And that's a radical new thing, and suggests that there will be no backing off. And then they're going to bring up reserves, this 300,000, as I think you pointed out. Russia has potentially got 25 million, people with men of military age who have army experience. So 300,000 isn't that many, but these are people with vital military skills, combat experience, and they're clearly going to be thrown in, if not before winter, then perhaps in January, when the ground is frozen and the time for offensives is good in this part of the world. And that definitely portends much wider, much more destructive and bloodier war.
Right. So you are expecting things to get worse here on. Ambassador Prakash, when you hear President Biden at the UNGA, when we heard President Zelensky, what do you think the mood at the UNGA was, and what is the big message that comes out of there when it comes to President Putin's offensive and his ability to take up things a notch higher?
The mood in the UNGA, and for that matter across capitals, is rather somber, because this is a very serious escalation. And the West has committed huge resources to push back Russia. To be frank, it is not a Russia-Ukraine conflict so much as a conflict or a battle between Russia and the West, particularly Russia and the US. And in this, Russia is clearly on the back foot. It has been humbled. So now the problem is that the conflict, if it escalates and the unthinkable happens, then there is no end to it. It will become very difficult to dial it down. So what should be done? There is a lot of pressure. There is a lot of angry accusations, but also there is a reality. The reality is that a nuclear conflict cannot be won, should not be started. Also, the winter is coming, and Ukraine and Europe is going to face a huge energy crisis, food security, food crisis. So it is something which the world did not want, but willy-nilly you have gotten pushed into it. And I hope and pray that it stops here, because the way it is spiraling, it can go out of control, and then it will become very, very difficult to take charge of it and dial down the tensions. I hope that wiser sense prevails on all sides.
Right. You're hoping that wiser sense prevails. But Fred, coming back to you, when it comes to this exercise of referendum that we are seeing some Russian-backed separatists call for in parts of Ukraine, what is the larger strategy? We had seen in 2014 the annexation of Crimea after such an exercise. So what could be the larger intention now? Is it to mark territory? Is it to justify a larger offensive?
I think it's both. It definitely is intended to those territories and the Russian occupation of them as irreversible. As I said, the state boundary from the Russian point of view will move right up to the front line, and presumably any territory they take beyond that will also become part of Russia. This is something like we haven't seen in a long time. Russia is completely off the reservation in terms of the currently acting world order. And Putin is talking in terms of Russian history a lot. And indeed, Russian history was a long parade of expanding the imperial borders. But this is the 21st century, and this is a new set of rules for our time. But these referendums, which are going to take place in the next few days, will pretty much make that a fact of life as far as the Russians are concerned. Putin made that clear. I think people may be freaking out a bit too much about what he said about nuclear weapons. He is not talking about using nuclear weapons on the territory of Ukraine or to win the war against Ukraine. He is mainly, and from the very beginning of this war, when the Russians bring up their nuclear arsenal, they're basically warning the West to stay out of direct involvement in Ukraine, that any direct clash between NATO and Russia can escalate to a nuclear war. But that's dangerous enough. It's really, I mean, in response to that fairly minor setback in Kharkov a couple of weeks ago, yes, they lost a lot of territory, but they lost almost nothing in terms of military capabilities. They got their forces out, reestablished a front line, but the psychological impact of that in the world and in Russia itself has brought this on. And now I'm afraid we're going into a much, much more desperate situation.
Right. Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, my final question to you in order to sum up this discussion. What kind of a diplomatic solution can work in a situation like this? You have a president who has taken the losses in Ukraine very, very seriously. He wants to check any sort of anti-Russia sentiment or anger against the Russian presidency because of this war as well. He's calling up reservists to further justify his offensive. In such a situation, how do you come out with a diplomatic solution?
That is the most difficult part, because he cannot put an end to the conflict empty-handed. He has something to show, because the nation has lost lots of men, material. The sanctions on Russia will not go away in a hurry. Russia has lost standing. It's a depleted power for what? So there has to be some gain, but given the fact that Russia has seen such setbacks, the West and Zelensky is not going to concede him any military honors, battle honors. So that therein lies the crunch, because the West is seeing that it's possible to beat back Russia. So for Putin, it's now a question of political survival. And hitherto he was in control, he is still in control, but calling up the reservists is going to cause a lot of tension, and things are quite shaky for him, and that makes the situation even more dangerous.
Right. It makes the situation more dangerous, and on the whole shows that we could be in for a protracted and complicated war. Thank you very much, Fred, and thank you very much, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, for joining us here on Newscentre, giving us your view on the latest messages coming from President Putin and also the mood at the UNGA. Time for a break, but when we return, we shift our focus to the telecom sector. My colleague Ashmit Kumar discusses the contours of the draft telecom bill with Deloitte's Piyush Vash and Jaideep Ghosh of Shardul Amarchand Mangaldas. Don't go anywhere. That discussion